Sorry to interrupt. We are going to be getting started with the program. And feel free to continue eating or get more food at any point, so don't let that stop you. Welcome to the event. And again, I'm Jen. I'm the director here at the Illinois Disciples Foundation. And we are here for the annual fall dinner, and hopefully you're in the right place. So, the IDF is a Peace with Justice campus ministry and nonprofit organization. And we've been involved with many, many issues. We've actually are celebrating our 100th anniversary this year. Lately, we've been very heavily involved in anti-war work. We've also done a lot of work around Coca-Cola and its labor rights and environmental and any sort of violation you can imagine. So we also have a lot of work going on through our programs like the Progressive Resource Action Cooperative. The PRC is a multi-issue, multi-tactical organization, and they have been doing anti-war work as well, along with doing work around the chief issue at the U of I. I want to thank our co-sponsors for tonight's event for helping getting people out here. So the co-sponsors are Activist Forum, the Anti-War, Anti-Racism Effort Aware, Campus Greens, Champaign County Healthcare Consumers, Channing Murray Foundation, the National Organization of Women at U of I, the Progressive Resource Action Cooperative, the UC Friends Meeting, Vietnam Veterans Against the War, and the Women's Direct Action Collective. And at this point, I am going to go ahead and introduce our speakers for tonight. Then they will speak, and then we will have the raffle, which you will have chances after the speaker to buy more raffle tickets and to turn them in and everything. So don't worry about that. Tonight's speakers are Paul and Pat Vogol, and they are active members of the Military Families Speak Out, a national organization of over 3,000 military families who are seeking an immediate withdrawal of our troops, the proper care of our wounded, and a full accounting for this disaster. The Vogols have been speaking out against the war since their son Aaron was deployed to Iraq in April 2003. In November 2003, Paul traveled to Bakuba, Iraq, and sorry if I mispronounced that, through the help of the American Friends Service Committee to visit his son. He was able to meet with many local Iraqis, from families with a daughter in the Baghdad Orchestra to religious leaders who worked with local NGOs. Paul also met with other soldiers in Aaron's unit during his visit and heard of the suffering and sense of betrayal these soldiers felt. The fear and anger the Iraqi people also felt was very apparent even then. Their son returned safely in April 2004, but 4 soldiers in his unit were not as lucky. In December 2004, Paul petitioned the governor of Illinois to join only 5 other states in honoring the soldiers from our state who had been killed in Iraq and Afghanistan by lowering the U.S. and state flags to half-staff on the day of the funeral for that soldier. The governor issued a proclamation to that effect in February 2005. In March 2005, Pat was one of 6 people arrested by the Chicago police during a protest march to mark the 2nd anniversary of the Iraq War. Most recently, Pat joined Cindy Sheehan in Crawford, Texas, to demand an answer from President Bush about what our soldiers are dying for. At this point, I'd like to welcome our speakers, Paul and Pat. Please give them a round of applause.
Thanks very much for coming out tonight, and thanks for the wonderful meal tonight. It's not your usual church fare, so it's wonderful. And right away, what I'll do is get the advertisement out of the way for Military Families Speak Out. Military Families Speak Out is an organization of people who are opposed to the war in Iraq and who have relatives or loved ones in the military. We were formed in November of 2002 and have contacts with military families throughout the United States and in other countries around the world. Our membership currently includes over 3,000 military families, with new families joining daily. And I might add that since this last summer with Cindy Sheehan's exposure, the number of military families has been just quadrupling every week that we have members. And I would not be surprised if we're closing in on 4,000 military families. As people with family members and loved ones in the military, we have both a special need and a unique role to play in speaking out against war in Iraq. It is our loved ones who are, or have been, or will be on the battlefront. It is our loved ones who are risking injury and death. It is our loved ones who are returning scarred from their experiences. and it is our loved ones who will have to live with the injuries and deaths among innocent Iraqi civilians. We urge you, if you know of a military family or if you have loved ones in the military who are opposed to this war, to join us. And to do so, it's a very simple email address, which is www.mfso.org. That's Military Family Speak Out, mfso.org. So that's the commercial for Military Families Speak Out, and quite frankly, were it not for groups like this, Pat and I may have gone stark raving mad by now. As was mentioned, our son did go to Iraq in 2003, shortly after the invasion, and did safely return, thankfully, but not so for 4 of his buddies. And to trace back to why we're even standing here, because we are not long-term activists. We are from a fairly wealthy suburb of Barrington, Illinois, which is just northwest of Chicago. Some of the most hardcore Republican donors are from Barrington area. And it is that area which you would not suspect a military family to even exist. And that's why we find there's a lot of curiosity when we do start speaking out. We were telling our table mates today that what really prompted Pat and I to even begin to think about speaking out against this war was not only that Aaron went to the war really against our wishes, was that we, after being the typical military family and being silent about what was going on, decided to, when Aaron's first buddy was killed by an RPG to the side of his truck, I decided to go to the funeral for this father of 3, a 39-year-old father of 3, Sergeant Dan Gabrielson. And Pat went down to a memorial for the Iraqi victims of the war that the American Friends Service Committee had done. And that really, those 2 events were the catalyst for us to start speaking out. And in the last 2 years, it just kind of continues this snowball. And MFSO really has been a lifesaver for us. What I wanted to talk about, though, was what was mentioned in the bio there about the fact that I did travel to Baghdad and to Baquba, Iraq, when my son was there. And I find it interesting that, I don't know how many of you remember when the Washington, D.C., the Congress, the House, decided they were going to change French fries to freedom fries. Mm-hmm. And, you know, more of the ridiculous things that our lawmakers sometimes do. But I don't know if you remember Representative Walter Jones, who was part of those who sponsored that change in name. He was one of those who said, we got to do this, you know, we're for the war, we got to support our allies, and the French are not helping us out. Let me just read real quickly. This was in June of just this last summer that talks about Walter Jones. A prominent lawmaker who prompted cafeterias in the U.S. Congress to change the name of their French fries to freedom fries in anger over France's opposition to the Iraq War has now turned against the conflict and wants a firm schedule on the withdrawal of troops. Representative Walter Jones, a North Carolina Republican, has written more than 1,300 letters of condolences to the families of soldiers killed in Iraq. How many letters has Bush written? I don't think any. Condolences to the families of soldiers killed in Iraq, and will introduce legislation this week, this was last June, calling for a firm timetable on the withdrawal of U.S. troops. This is what I believe is the right thing to do for our military first, and secondly, I think we are doing everything we can to do in Iraq to give them an opportunity to have a democracy, to defend themselves, Jones told ABC. He said, the change of heart occurred when I look at the number of men and women who have been killed. It's almost 1,700 now. I don't know if you saw this number, but this is what it is today. 1,700, in addition to close to 12,000 who've been severely wounded, and I just feel that the reason of going in for weapons of mass destruction, the ability of the Iraqis to make a nuclear weapon, that's all been proven that it was never there. And I finished the quote with him saying, my heart aches, quite frankly, Jones told ABC. I never thought I'd have anything in common with Walter Jones. But in fact, he talks about the fact that he had attended the funerals of a father, the funeral of a father of 3, and that from that time on, his thinking and his feeling had started to change. That's what started to change, as I mentioned, for me as well, by attending the funeral for Sergeant Dan Gabrielson, who was a 39-year-old father of 3. And I'm sorry, I was not technically prepared with the overhead, so I ended up having to, I'll pass these pictures around that I have from my trip to Iraq. But here is the funeral, the casket of the soldier who I went to up in Spooner, Wisconsin. Dan Gabrielson had 3 kids, lived in a rural farmer community in Spooner, Wisconsin. And I urge all of you, if you have a chance, to go to a military funeral. There is something raw and powerful that grabs you deep. And I suppose it has a lot of impact on a father who has a soldier there. But I think it touches everybody who attends those. And obviously Walter Jones was touched by the funeral that he went to. And so with that in mind, I had decided I needed to go to Iraq to see my son before, well, literally before he came home in a casket. And so I had arranged through the American Friends Service Committee to head over there. And my talk is regarding, I guess, my feelings today as to why we should be out of Iraq and what my experiences relate to there. In October of 2003, I traveled to Iraq and found that the conditions in Baghdad were beyond description. The amount of gas shortages that were there created huge lines for people to get gas for their cars. The power was going out constantly. The hotel I stayed in, when the power would go out, the sewer would back up and the room would fill with sewer gas. There was no work for anybody in Baghdad, save for those who were being hired, the few Iraqis who were being hired to do very menial street cleaning or other basic work that anybody could have taken, but in fact were being shoved off onto even the upper echelon of the Iraqi society. In the midst of the conditions that I found in October of 2003, we arranged to have a driver who would take me from Baghdad up to Baquba, which is about an hour north of Baghdad. And we arranged with the help of the Mennonites to get an Iraqi driver whose name was Imad. Imad was a Shia who lived in the west side of Baghdad in a neighborhood, I don't remember the name right offhand, but he lived in a neighbor of other Shia. And we worked with his brother, or the American Friends Service Committee had worked with him, so we knew he was somebody we could probably trust to be able to drive up there. He and I worked out the plans. We paid him $50 a day to drive me to Baquba. He hadn't been to Baquba for over 3 years, even though it was less than the distance from here to, say, 50 miles away. And the most shocking thing to him is when I pulled out a map of Iraq. He was shocked to see a map of Iraq because he had never seen one before. Under Saddam, they were banned. And so I left that map with him, but in the meantime, we struggled to get up to Baquba to see where my son was. And upon finding it, we were luckily and surprised to see him well and happy there in Baquba, guarding a civilian building. During the whole week that I was in Iraq, back and forth we drove, Imad and I, and we talked about his hopes and how hard it was being Shia under Saddam, but also how he was surprised and angry that the U.S. could not bring security except to the oil ministry and the oil fields. He talked of hope, but even then, 2 years ago, with increasing frustration of the help that most Iraqi believed was coming, the frustration that the help was not coming. He took the job at great risk to himself to take me up to the Sunni city of Baquba because he had to provide for his family. He understood why a father would risk his life to see his son, since he had his own small son and daughter. On the last day of my trip, when I left Aaron, my son, in Baquba, I got into the car. I can't even read this anymore. And within a few hundred yards, I broke down and sobbed. Imad was surprised, but then immediately began to say in his limited English, I'm sorry your son had to come here. We are grateful for him, but we worry for our future if America does not make things better soon. Today, after 2 years of war, I am the one who must say I'm sorry to Imad. I do not know if Imad is still alive. He lived in Baghdad, where the last 2 years have seen horrible bloodshed of Iraqi. I must say I'm sorry to Imad and his family because we have not kept our promises to the Iraqi people. I'm sorry, Imad, because the gas shortages continue. The electricity in Mosul, Baghdad, and other major cities is still below pre-Saddam levels. Iraqis cannot get good work, and the only work they get, they still risk their lives by joining police, Iraqi National Guard, or working for occupation forces in menial jobs. I'm sorry, Ahmad, that 2 years later I would not dare to try to come and visit you because I would put you and your family in more danger for being associated with an American. I am sorry, Ahmad. But I will continue to fight to make our government accountable and pressure this Congress to demand a timetable for withdrawal of our troops. For that is the conclusion of many in Iraq, that we are not the solution. The U.S. is the problem, and they want us to go. David Enders, a journalist who had stayed in Iraq and talks to regular Iraqis, not to those the coalition allows mainstream media to interview, has these points regarding why American troops should leave and not stay. Point number one, it is the will of the Iraqi people. Enders cites a recent survey, and this was early last spring, by Iraqi pollster Sadoun al-Dulami, who found that 85% of Iraqi people want U.S. troops out of their country as soon as possible. Number two, the U.S. does not provide security for the average Iraqi, and it never has. Number three, the U.S. has not prevented a civil war from taking place. If anything, it has exacerbated it. And number four, he says it is not morally derelict to pull out, it is morally derelict to stay. Returning real control and sovereignty to Iraqis is the most effective way to prevent the country from breaking apart. U.S. troops complain Iraqis don't want to stand up and fight for themselves, and a big part of the reason is the occupiers' presence. I experienced that as well when I was there, is that many of the Iraqis said, we are happy Saddam is gone, but now please go. And the other reservists who worked with my sons were saying the same thing. Enders, the journalist, is right on in saying that all who claim to be either progressive or willing to be, all who are progressive must hear and listen to. And then it is easy to challenge the ongoing war. Progressives and peace activists must resist the urge to say, well, we owe the Iraqi. Well, we don't owe them. We owe them an honest assessment of the mess we have made and a true opportunity for the right to determine their society's future, not our paternalistic, militaristic, know-all and do-all attitude. I challenge all of you to look at the information about Iraqi opinion polls that show they want us out. And I challenge you to call for a vote, a referendum if you wish, that gives the Iraqi people the chance to voice their desires for continued occupation or for the removal of the festering presence our troops create for their country. My feeling is this president would not allow such freedom because he would not want to abide the results. It is okay for the Ukrainians to mass and revolt for a new leader. It is okay for Lebanon to protest and demand a new leader. But if the Iraqi were given as much freedom to vote on our presence, their president would deny it. Our presence there, this president would deny it and insist we stay for the good of freedom. My wife and I had dinner a number of months ago with a retired Methodist clergy. He and his wife were friends of her mother. We're on the same page against the war, and we were talking as if we were on the same page until I heard come from their mouths, the same old cop-out that I've heard from far too many. We cannot pull out, we must fix the problem. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the problem and we are not the solution. And I will repeat it just like Bush repeated weapons of mass destruction in his speeches prior to the war. We are not the solution, we are the problem. We are not the solution, we are the problem. And we must stand with one voice behind those in Congress who are putting the option of a timetable for withdrawal on the table and making sure it stays there. Representative Jan Schakowsky from the 9th District near Chicago has bravely come out and said it is time for withdrawal. We owe her for taking such a clear and strong stand to abandon exit for our troops. We owe her and must stand clearly with her and must tell her and all in Congress who continue to fight against this occupation that we have their backs. We understand that the Iraqi people want us out, that many lives will be saved, American and Iraqi, by our withdrawal, and that if we do not drum away at this Congress administration, we will be standing here 1 year from now saying what a crime it is that we are still in Iraq, counting the over 3,000 soldiers dead, the 200,000 Iraqi dead, and the loss of our economy and the soul of our nation. So I stand here as the father of a soldier, one who has spent time with a father in Iraq and heard what he would want for his children, and ask you, no, I beg you, to not take the easy way out and wash your hands of speaking out against this occupation in Iraq. I beg you to support all those in government who seek for a withdrawal immediately. This is the only path that assures the Iraqis wish to have us leave, in the only way we can give Imad, the father in Baghdad, a future no less uncertain, but a future created by Iraqis and not by hubris-driven America. Please bring the troops home. Give the Iraqi their country back now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for having us here tonight. I just want to reinforce what Paul has said and make some of the same points in my own words. I think we all have to go through that exercise and figure out how we feel about this and why. Military Families Speak Out was one of the first organizations to say, bring the troops home now. And I have to admit that I thought our group was really spitting into the wind when we took that stand. At the time, it was considered a totally unrealistic position. But now, I think of it as not radical at all, but rather a compromise. On the one side, we know the troops never should have been in Iraq in the first place. On the other side, President Bush seems to want them to stay there indefinitely. In the spirit of negotiation, I'd say it's a workable compromise to say they should come home right now. But seriously, there are a lot of reasons we should be leaving. A basic rule of good management is that when something isn't working, you should change it, not stay the course. If every decision of mine were as catastrophically wrong as the Bush administration's has been for the last 3 years, I wouldn't be able to show my face at my office. These people in the administration have no shame. So far, the administration has been right about nothing. So whatever it is they want to do, we should actually do the opposite. I know it sounds kind of simple and trite, but this could be our best guideline. With their track record, if the Bush administration thinks we should stay in Iraq, we know automatically that that's the wrong decision. Another reason to leave is the simple and self-evident fact that our presence fuels violence and terrorism. It doesn't prevent it. Our presence only serves to show that we are occupiers, and occupiers are universally hated. When we say we won't leave until the violence ends, it puts more control into the hands of Al-Qaeda-like groups. It's actually advantageous for them to have us stay there. They're perfectly happy to watch us bankrupt ourselves and to watch our whole army slowly bleed to death. Another self-evident reason we shouldn't be there is because we're still killing a lot of innocent people. At checkpoints, during firefights with snipers, while raiding homes, and as a result of air assaults, American troops are probably killing at minimum 25,000 people per year, as calculated by Michael Schwartz in a recent article for Common Dreams. And this is a conservative number compared to the 100,000 civilian deaths estimated by an international team of public health researchers and published a year ago. If we insist on a military response to the insurgency, we'll end up bombing the whole country into oblivion. We've already done this on a small scale with Fallujah, Ramadi, and Tal Afar. Untold numbers of civilians have been killed in those places, and much of these cities destroyed. And yet we are told that many fighters manage to slip away and go elsewhere. If we allow military logic to prevail, that means we must bomb the whole country all at once in order to defeat them. Is this really the solution? Finally, as Paul has pointed out, the vast majority of Iraqis wants us out. Republicans are fond of calling for an up or down vote when it comes to Supreme Court nominees. Well, I think we should give the Iraqis an up or down vote concerning whether we should stay or go. I'm willing to abide by their decision, and I think President Bush should too. If the Iraqis want the U.S. to continue its occupation of their country, I'll drop all my peace work and I'll hold a sign that says, "Stay the course," in the next big demonstration. But if they clearly want the U.S. to leave, I think Bush, the great believer in democracy, should respect their wishes. And speaking of democracy, all Iraqis must have a stake in their country's success, not just the Shiites and Kurds. The new constitution divided the country more than it united it. If we're going to use our power to influence what happens in the new Iraqi government, let's at least put in incentives for the major groups to work together. It must be more advantageous to cooperate rather than to fight for power. The only problem is that the current group in power in Washington doesn't know how to cooperate. The only way they know how to govern is to shove their policies down everyone's throats and to hold on to power at any costs. Not a very good model for a fledgling Iraqi government whose most urgent need is for gracious cooperation between competing interests. The sooner we have regime change at home, the sooner we'll be a good model for another country to follow. When your own government doesn't work for the common good, how can you tell another government that they should? I'd like to just take a moment to rebut some of the favored catchphrases of the pro-war people. We've all heard them, and we need to face them head-on if we're going to get anywhere. First of all, I find it so ironic that they're finally talking about ethics. They didn't care about the Iraqis during all the years of sanctions. They didn't care about the certainty of civilian death and suffering because of our invasion. But now they've developed a sudden concern for the Iraqis, which is only spouted because they see it as justifying the continued occupation. To this, I would say that if we're going to start talking about ethical behavior, the very first thing we should do is to admit our mistakes. It is amazing how far a simple thing like that would go towards resolving the problems we've created. We have to start admitting our mistakes and fixing them rather than making excuses for them. Many people are afraid a civil war will happen if we leave. But think about it. If a civil war happens, it won't look much different from what's already happening. Neither the insurgents, nor the army, nor the militias have tanks, and they don't have airplanes. And U.S. military flyovers would discourage the formation of large-scale hand-to-hand combat between the various players. So what are we left with? Pretty much what's going on now. So why are we still there? Nobody knows exactly what will happen if we pull out. Why don't we try it and see? The pro-war folks are very proud of purple fingers. But the truth is that having an opportunity to vote in and of itself doesn't necessarily make for good government. Remember, Iraqis went to their polling places while Saddam was in power too. Holding elections is easy, but building a well-functioning representative government is not. The people who say there's so much good news in Iraq that's not reported like to talk about how many schools we've built there as an example of something good that's happening. But why are we and our corporate war profiteers building the schools and not the Iraqis who need jobs so badly? Another favorite saying of the Bush administration is that we are training Iraqi troops so that we can stand down as they stand up. Let's examine this. Are we training them to take over for us when we leave and do everything we're doing? That means they'll man checkpoints, raid houses, and torture prisoners. Why would we consider that a success? We're asking them to fight their own people. So all that training is just training for a civil war. An example of this is what we did when we recently subdued the city of Tal Afar. We put Shiites in the front line against this Sunni city. Is it any wonder that a few days later, the so-called Bloody Wednesday occurred in Baghdad, where 12 car bombs killed 160 people in a Shia neighborhood? Why are we training Iraqis to do what we're doing when what we're doing is such a mistake? Why aren't we training people how to talk and negotiate with one another instead of how to fight one another? Why is our measure of success how many Iraqis there are in the army instead of how many Iraqis have been put back to work in other jobs? Problems must be solved politically, not militarily. We need to encourage and assist the talkers, not the fighters. So to summarize what Paul and I are saying, why Paul and I are saying that we're the problem and not the solution, here's why. We orchestrate a prelude to civil war by using Shiite soldiers to rout out Sunni fighters. That's a problem. We reduce whole communities to rubble and displace hundreds of thousands of people in order to go after insurgents. That's a problem. We shoot innocent civilians because everyone is seen as a possible threat. That's a problem. We brutalize prisoners and in the process dehumanize ourselves. That's a problem. We push a vote on a deeply flawed constitution which spells out in black and white Iraq's new winners and losers. The winners, Shiites and Kurds. The losers, Sunnis and women. That's another problem. And the biggest problem of all is that President Bush can't afford to leave Iraq because his whole presidency is built upon his image as the war president. He has no other identity. Our sons and daughters and the citizens of Iraq continue to bleed and die just so that the president doesn't have to change his self-image. If that isn't criminal, I don't know what is. The solution, of course, would be impeachment and an appearance at the International Criminal Court for George Bush. But since that won't happen with the Republicans in power, we need to put pressure on Congress to start supporting plans for withdrawal. Specifically, there are resolutions in the House and one in the Senate asking for either immediate withdrawal or a planned withdrawal, or at the very least, a statement that we have no intention to stay in Iraq forever. Can you imagine a congressperson not supporting a statement that says we won't be in Iraq forever? I think at the very least we can push our congresspeople to support that and probably to support any of these other resolutions. If I thought MFSO was spitting in the wind when they first said, bring the troops home, since I visited Camp Casey, I know that the wind has changed. And politicians always go the way the wind is blowing. Let's make it a gale force and see what happens. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I think another round of applause is due. At this point, I think we wanted to open it up for questions. So, if anyone has questions or discussion points?
I wanted to ask them how your son is and what is he doing now?
No, our son is doing fine. He's out in California studying photography at Brooks Institute, and he is still in the Army Reserves. His unit has not been activated again, but there's always that risk. He has at least a few months left on active reserve, and then he has 2 years on what they call ready reserve, inactive. But again, you're still at risk. So. But after the year we spent with him over there, believe me, he will not touch foot in Iraq again. If I have to kidnap him and bring him to Canada, that's what we'll do. So.
I'd also like to mention he joined a group called Iraq Vets Against the War, which is similar to Vietnam Vets Against the War. In fact, they helped them get started. So he himself has been speaking out against the war. He's in LA, and he's been invited every once in a while to events to speak out against it.
in the back, and then.
I just had a question. In your speech, you talked about leaving up to the will of the people of Iraq for our withdrawal from the country. I was just wondering how you would feel about certain decisions that the will of the people of Iraq made, such as their constitution and being unfair to Sunnis or minorities.
Well, we had quite a hand in the construction of that Constitution. Federalism in particular was something that we pushed very, very strongly. And it's clear that federalism, to the degree that it's spelled out, is not going to be something good for the Iraqis. So once again, we meddled in something that perhaps some other people could have guided them a little better on.
This isn't really a question, but thank you very much for coming and giving such a strong statement for withdrawing the troops. I represented the Urbana-Champaign Friends meeting, and I just think this is an appropriate time to bring this up. We have made a statement in our meeting that we're asking Congress to pass a resolution to withdraw troops. And we are looking for other faith-based groups that would like to make similar statements, and what we want to do is have a press conference here in Champaign-Urbana. So the Mennonites have passed a resolution, Channing Murray Foundation, see if I can get the name right, Methodist Federation for Social Concerns has, which is a local group, has passed a resolution. The Social Concerns Committee at St. Patrick's Catholic Church. So we're looking for churches or committees within churches or anything that is faith-based. So if anyone's interested in doing that, you can talk to me afterwards and I'll give you some more information. So
Absolutely,
thank you very
and
much.
we are strong supporters of MFS with AFSC in Chicago. They do a national tour with the Boots exhibit, which I understand has been in Champaign a couple times. We've spoken with that event in DC and Pat in Jacksonville. But on the flip side, mainline religion, the faith-based groups, we've been sorely disappointed in, and we urge you as local activists to demand stronger participation amongst our faith-based community. If you look down the roster of all the major religions, the Catholics, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, all of them, their leadership was strongly against the war before it started. In fact, I forget what church George Bush claims he belongs to, but I read the statement by his bishop, the Methodist. His bishops came out strongly, probably more strongly than most, against what this president was doing. So he chooses to ignore that part of his faith, to not listen to this leadership of his church. But I urge you, though, local faith-based units to definitely pull together and speak to your congressman, because clearly the other side of the roster, faith-based, the strong, Christian right, sees no objection to politicizing anything that related to their faith as far as their leadership. Witness the Dobsons of the world and that type of thing.
Yes, in the middle.
Yes, you mentioned that there are some resolutions in Congress for pulling out of Iraq. I want to know who is sponsoring those resolutions. I want to know who you are dealing with at the Senate level or higher level, people that are sympathetic to at least limiting and perhaps pulling out of Iraq.
Okay.
I think it's very important to go after the people that are after get crowds.
Absolutely. MFSO has made it a very, very high priority to work on Congress, to help them get a little bit of a backbone to stand up against this. We will be meeting with our congressperson next week. We met with one of her staff when we were in Washington in September and followed up through that. It has taken quite a number of phone calls. Paul's been on the phone. He's been very persistent, but it paid off, and we will be meeting with her We're rounding up a few other people. So there will be a small group of us, and we want to have a very, very productive conversation, but we also want to show our congressperson that her constituents feel very strongly about this and hope and expect her to vote a certain way. So we would encourage everybody to do that. It's really not that hard to make contact with your congressperson and to establish a dialogue. And I think it's something that they do take into account when they hear from their constituents. Just to rattle off some of the resolutions. The Friends Committee on National Legislation is very informative on this. www.fcnl.org, Friends Committee on National Legislation. House Resolution number 35 asks for a plan for an immediate withdrawal of the United States Armed Forces. House Resolution 55 is talking about, that first one was introduced by Representative Woolsey of California with 35 co-sponsors currently. Number 55, introduced by Walter Jones, that Paul mentioned, along with Representatives Abercrombie, Kucinich, Lee, Paul, and Woolsey, with 62 co-sponsors. This one is asking for a plan that should be announced by December 31st of this year, and withdrawals must be initiated by October 1st of 2006. Resolution number 197, introduced by Representative Lee of California with 58 co-sponsors. And this is the one that simply asks that the United States should not enter into any base agreement with the government of Iraq that would lead to a permanent United States military presence in Iraq. When we visited with our congressman's assistant, one of the things he just threw out as something that was just common wisdom, he said, well, nobody expects us to be in Iraq forever. And we had to stop him there and say, really, that's not true. President Bush, from all indications, is going to want to be there forever because he hasn't set up any parameters that would allow us to leave. And from everything that he says and does, it appears that he expects us to be there forever. There are permanent bases being built there. So you simply cannot say that nobody expects us to be there forever. That's not the case. So it would be a very important thing for Congress to state that simple fact. If that's the assumption, let's state it. What's so hard about that?
Who is your congressman from this area? A person?
Tim Johnson.
And he's a Republican. And have you heard or gotten any indication that where he stood prior to the war? Does he wholeheartedly support?
He said he trusted them.
He trusted who?
He trusted the Bush administration to make the decision. He thought they have more information than we do.
Nice.
Well, he's got a lot of information now, so maybe he'll change his mind.
But even so, my point was I would encourage you to at least communicate with him in a respectful and mindful way, but communicate your concerns, and it definitely has an impact. Again, Pat and I were not activists prior to getting as angry as we were about this. And we have been pleasantly surprised at how effective you can be. Yes, as military families, we carry a little weight, but even those of you who can speak to them in a rational and thoughtful way have a deep impact that many of you may not realize. So we cannot encourage you more, either as a faith-based group or as somebody as a concerned citizen, to speak to your representative, because it does have an impact. One point that was something I just pulled off the net yesterday was that a general from the Maine National Guard, and of course the National Guard and the reservists are paying a heavy price in this war because of the multiple times that they've had to serve. He came back and basically reiterated the same thing that Pat and I had pointed out. One, that when he talked to regular Iraqis, they said, thank you for getting rid of Saddam, now please get out, because they see us as occupiers. He in fact heard that and was digesting that. But he also said, much like what this legislation is talking about, that many of the bases, the forward operating bases that were built in northern Iraq are now being abandoned and brought back and centralized into massive bases. As Cindy Sheehan says, the size of Sacramento are being centralized so that we will end up with 2 or 3 large bases in Iraq with the idea that we will, quote, protect our interests there. Which of course means oil or the ability to strike into Iran or Syria and start other wars. So, you know, there's no question that when you challenge these Congress people or believers that somehow we're doing the right thing for Iraq by staying, it's important not to get your facts, but also to talk about what other people who've been there are seeing. Our Congresswoman, Melissa Bean, just came back from a trip to Iraq with other people to do a fact-finding mission. When we went with the aid, we suggested maybe she should get away from the military minders and go in and talk to regular Iraqis, but of course that's actually against the law. You would not be allowed as a congressperson to go in and do that. You have to be under the minders. So.
And it would have been helpful for her to get away from the hand-picked soldiers that she was speaking with and speak to the average soldier, because they don't see any reason that we're there.
I had a question about, I guess, one of the things that's been really disturbing to me with a lot of the propaganda coming out of the pro-war side has been this sort of inability to separate supporting the troops from supporting the mission, and to insinuate that anyone who is anti-war is somehow compromising either the morale or strength or something else like that of the troops. And I'm wondering if you can speak to what your impression of what your average servicemen or women on the ground actually do feel about that, and how they do react to anti-war sentiment expressed at home.
Soldiers hate those yellow ribbon magnets on the back of cars. Because they say, how in the heck does buying a little piece of rubber support me? I think they feel greater support from people who are trying to get them out of there. I think soldiers are smarter than those people that you're talking about take them for. Soldiers know that you can honor the warrior, but not the war. They know that deep down. You don't have to explain it to them. Morale is not good, and it's not because of peace activists. It's because of the no-win situation that they've been put in. So you don't have to worry about that. I think it boosts morale tremendously to think that there are people here at home who understand the worthlessness of this whole situation and are trying to get these guys home.
No, we did a march in Barrington a little over a year ago, and we drew over 1,000 people to that march to memorialize those who had been killed at that point. It had just hit 1,000 at that point. And all the irate calls from the Freepers, the guys from Free Republic, or all these other right-wing groups called and you know, said you're not supporting the troops. Well, nobody supports the troops more than a military family. And we support them by wanting to keep them alive, because usually that's the best kind of soldier you can have, is a live one. And those who think it's somehow honorable to slaughter more soldiers, to honor those who've already been slaughtered, are not worthy of even communicating with, as far as this military father believes. So, no, I would respect anybody who says we need to save soldiers' lives, not sacrifice them for some vain idea that we somehow have the solution to the world's ills. And anybody who can recognize that sooner rather than later is going to be part of the solution of getting our troops home. Because, you know, sadly tomorrow, another family will get the message that their son or daughter has been killed by a roadside bomb in Iraq. And it's not an academic exercise for them and a political discussion for them. It is a blood and flesh loss for that family, for those kids. That's one thing that I have a sign, and I've never put it out on the front yard because it's just too wrenching. And the sign keeps track of how many children have lost a mother or father in this war. And it's now over 3,000. 3,000
and
children.
theirs.
What's that?
Ours and theirs.
Absolutely.
Oh.
They are all our children. And you know, I'm the emotional one, so I'm going to stop. So.
Anyway, you get the picture. The first banner we put out said, "Proud of our soldier, ashamed of our president." So for us, that says it all.
Any other questions? What is your perception of the real support that soldiers receive from our government as far as, you know, benefits and supports from when they return home? And
Our son has been fortunate in that he has not been injured, didn't have to deal with the VA. We hear a lot of stories that say it's a struggle for soldiers to get what's due to them, and then what's due to them is constantly being cut also. Soldiers are deceived by their recruiters. It's really tragic, right down the line, the advantage that they are being taken for. You know, our son has lots of advantages in life. He has great family support. The Army wasn't his only option in life. So he's faring just fine. But there are plenty of people in the military who have really been used and abused, and now, you know, they've got nothing. It's a very, very common story.
But at the same token, we are not anti-military. We watched our son graduate from basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri many years ago, and felt very proud of the principles and the code of which our military are trained to believe in. It's just that our leaders choose to ignore those principles and codes that our military chooses to live by, of honor and truth and protecting innocent lives. So when you have leadership that betrays those ideals and leaves our soldiers to fend for themselves, and some of them don't do so well when they end up in positions of being able to abuse Iraqis or torture Iraqis, then we put them in those positions as leaders and as a country. And that makes it very tough to say that we're supporting troops when in fact we're leaving them to their own devices, and this is what happens. So we know there are, of course, people who make careers out of the military, and we support that 100%, but not when you end up with a bastardized version of leadership that puts our military at such great risk and puts so many lives lost for a cause that nobody can get behind. The biggest cause our soldiers want to support is each other. They want to see each other get the hell out of there, and they want out now. And that's the best support they get, is from each other.
How easily has your message been translated through the mainstream media, and have you had to work with them to bring the mainstream media on point? We had a situation here in Champaign-Urbana, for example, where we held a service to memorialize all of those people who had been killed by the war, and it was translated into something very different by the mainstream media. Wondering if you've had struggles and ways that you've had to learn how to deal with the mainstream media to get your message out.
We've been very lucky because as a military family we have built-in credibility, and we have had a lot of media coverage for the different things that we've spoken out against, whether it was the banner or the flags. We have an office in Barrington on Main Street where we put one flag in the ground for every soldier killed. Sadly, I'm 600 flags behind. They weather, they break, the ground is hard, and I'm running out of yard. I can't put 2,046 soldiers' flags in my yard right now. So sadly, we have to keep the sign that you see on the program there up to date, but that's with as many flags as we can behind it. So all these events have, over the last couple of years, transpired. And in fact, the trip to Baghdad was covered very heavily by the Chicago media. And again, with the idea that we are a military family who are speaking out against the war, and for whatever reason that's considered newsworthy. I think it is much harder for you as activist groups to get the right message out, and that's why many military families will lend their voice to your causes if you will stay on message. And it gives the media no reason to challenge your message when you do have somebody from the military who is with you on that message. What is very frustrating for us as a family is if we volunteer to speak or be part of an event and to have the message changed or garbled or directed somewhere else, then it gets very frustrating and very hard, because right or wrong, we want to stay on message, and that the message is Iraq is wrong and we need to get out of there. So it is frustrating, I know, and at times the reporters that we talk to, you get angry because of what they've done, but if there's coverage of what you've done, it's cumulative. You just keep plugging away with the same message, and in the end, they can't dismiss you. And in fact, the point is, and I dropped it from my speech, but the point is, when you look at the polls, we are the majority now. So we're not the minority. We're not fighting this uphill battle. We are the majority. And we can say to Congress, you better start listening. And as Pat said, you better start listening to the gale force that's coming your way.
Another question?
We're going to have to get going because we've got to get back to Barrington tonight, and she's got to be up at 7 in the morning. So we hate to cut it off, but we do need to get going. And we thank you so much for coming out tonight. Very powerful. Thank you.
I just want to give a personal thanks to Paul and Pat for coming out for this. At this point, we are going to have a few minutes where you can buy raffle tickets, and then we will begin the raffle. So while staff are selling tickets, I will read the list of prizes. Feel free if you do go back here and get all that. But if you're curious to see what you can win, here you go. The grand prize is a framed original artwork from Old Vic Art Gallery, which is over there. The second prize is a $100 gift certificate to Circles. The third prize is a framed The Nation cover. There's also gifts from Dandelion, G-Mart, Cranbrook Center, Moonstruck, Retro Rocket, and the Walnut Street Company. There's also gift certificates from Cafe Luna, Cafe Paradiso, Dandelion, The Dragon's Table, The Great Pasta, Jane Addams, Radio Maria, Red Herring, Strawberry Fields, and World Harvest. And there is merchandise from Campus Greens, Champaign County Healthcare Consumers, Graduate Employees Organization, the IDF, National Organization for Women, Progressive Resource Action Cooperative, and the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. So those are your prizes. Please purchase your tickets now.
I'm modeling the GEO.
Yes, if you're curious about the GEO shirt, you have a model right here.
Good luck. Thanks for coming.